Rome is not born as an empire in marble halls, but in exhausted silence after civil war, when people stop debating ideals and start pricing stability. Augustus builds the Principate by keeping old titles while concentrating real power. And the deal is simple. The Senate keeps dignity, the army gets paid, and the streets get grain. The legions become a career, the frontier becomes a job site, and the treasury becomes the quiet engine that keeps politics from turning back into swords. Over time, emperors learned the same constraint. It is easier to seize power than to hand it off without panic. Tiberius inherits a machine and adds caution. Caligula spends legitimacy like it is infinite. Claudius proves administration matters. Nero proves performance can rot governance from the inside. In the year of the 4 emperors, Rome relearns the rule it hates. When succession is unclear, every ambitious man becomes a risk asset with a private army. Vespasian restores discipline and finance after chaos, but he cannot repeal the deeper problem. Bloodline succession is a gamble, and gamblers eventually get gamblers. By Domitian's time, power is consolidated, suspicion is constant, and fear becomes a tax on decision-making paid by senators, generals, and citizens alike. When Domitian is killed in the palace in 96, the city does not celebrate loudly, because loud celebration can be misunderstood as the next accusation. Across the world, other empires watch Rome's incentives with clear eyes. The Han balance court factions in frontier costs, and Parthia trades space for time against Roman steel. No empire escapes arithmetic. Borders cost money, armies cost trust, and trust costs restraint. Rome's wealth comes from land, taxes, trade routes, and credibility that contracts will be enforced tomorrow as well as today. That credibility is fragile when the Praetorian Guard can decide who sits on the throne by deciding who lives through the week. So the question before the good years is not who is virtuous, but who can keep the coalition aligned without bleeding it dry. In Rome, that coalition is 3 forces in tension: senators who want predictability, soldiers who want competent leadership and pay, and ordinary people who want food, justice, and peace. Nerva, old and politically acceptable, takes power with a warning stamped into every corridor of the palace. Legitimacy is not a speech, it is a sequence of credible decisions. Nerva's first real move is not a law or a war, but a succession choice that calms the markets of power. In 97, he adopts Trajan, a respected general on the frontier. The adoption is a signal to the army that competence will be rewarded, and a signal to the Senate that the next hand will not be random. Trajan arrives without theatrical cruelty, and he treats the empire like a balance sheet with borders, liabilities, and opportunities that must be priced honestly. His Dacian campaigns are not won by fury, but by engineering, logistics, and morale. Roads cut through rough ground, bridges span rivers, and forts appear like stamped coins. Trajan understands soldiers follow leaders who share risk, so he is present in camp, visible on marches, and consistent in reward and discipline. In the Dacian Wars of 101 to 102 and 105 to 106, Rome annexes Dacia, and the victory is not just territory, but revenue, prestige, and a frontier simplified into a new line. In Rome, the column of Trajan later rises in 113 as a public ledger in stone, showing citizens that victory has a story, a cost, and a chain of work. Yet Trajan's success also expands the empire's obligations, because every new province adds administrators, garrisons, and promises that must be kept for decades. When Hadrian succeeds in 117, he inherits peak ambition and chooses a different strategy. He trades expansion for consolidation, because the downside risk is now larger than the upside. Hadrian travels relentlessly, not as tourism, but as inspection, because systems decay in the dark and improve when the center shows up in person. He reinforces discipline, standardizes administration, and treats legitimacy like maintenance, constant, unglamorous, and cheaper than a crisis. In Britain, he begins Hadrian's Wall around 122, a line of stone that admits a hard truth: control is not conquest, it is predictable boundaries and managed movement. The wall is policy made visible, a way to reduce raids, regulate trade, and signal to both soldiers and locals where Rome will pay to defend and where it will not. Hadrian also understands elites, so he balances firm authority with cultural respect, building, sponsoring, and blending Roman power with provincial pride. Antoninus Pius succeeds in 138 and becomes the quiet compounding phase: fewer dramatic campaigns, more attention to law, finance, infrastructure, and the daily credibility of institutions. Stability under Antoninus is not passive, it is the result of disputes settled, taxes collected without panic, roads maintained, and officials held to standards. In a wealthy household, surplus is protected by routine, and in a wealthy empire, surplus is protected by boring competence. Marcus Aurelius takes power in 161, and from the start he rules with constraints. He shares the throne with Lucius Verus, and he inherits a world that is about to tighten. Marcus is trained in Stoic philosophy, and he treats emotion as weather, not as a steering wheel, which is useful when the empire stops cooperating with plans. War presses on multiple fronts, and Marcus spends long seasons with the army along the Danube, facing enemies who are mobile, patient, and willing to wait out Roman supply lines. His strategy is not heroic charges, but endurance. Secure rivers, fortify crossings, keep units fed, rotate exhausted men, and make the enemy pay for time. He leads by example in the one way that matters in cold camps: consistency. Because soldiers can handle hardship better than they can handle chaos. Then disease arrives as a second enemy that does not negotiate, and the Antonine Plague spreads through the empire from the mid-160s, thinning cities and camps alike. You see it in emptied markets, in fewer hands at the docks, in funeral smoke beyond the walls, and in tax offices asked to collect the same obligations from fewer living bodies. Marcus responds as a manager under load. He funds public needs, stabilizes recruitment, and treats panic as a threat to morale that multiplies death by disorder. In private, he writes to train his own mind, drafting what becomes the Meditations as a set of short drills: attention, humility, duty, and control of impulse. The writing is not philosophy for applause, it is self-command in the face of pain, fatigue, and the constant temptation to become cruel when control feels thin. He reminds himself that reputation is vapor, that anger is optional, that the job is the job, and that the only real time to act is the present moment. This interior discipline supports exterior policy, because an emperor who cannot govern himself will eventually govern by mood, and moods are expensive. Yet Marcus faces a problem no Stoic sentence can dissolve. Succession is coming, and the adoption strategy that protected the system is not used again. Instead, Marcus chooses his son Competence as heir, and the empire quietly shifts from selection to inheritance, from tested competence to hoped-for potential. When Marcus dies in 180, the 84-year sequence closes, and the cost of those good years becomes visible. A machine can run smoothly and still drift toward a fragile handoff. Competence rules as if legitimacy is a personal entitlement, not a shared contract, and the coalition begins to misprice risk again because fear returns to the room. After his death, Rome enters another cycle of instability, and in 193, the year of the 5 emperors, shows how quickly power becomes an auction when succession lacks credibility. The Severan dynasty restores a form of order, but it leans harder on the army, and when soldiers become the main political audience, the budget becomes a battlefield. In the 3rd century, crises stack: invasions, civil wars, debased coinage, and shrinking trust. and each quick fix trades future stability for present survival. Diocletian reorganizes the empire at the end of that century, raising administration, taxes, and control because the old structure cannot carry the new load. Constantine then reshapes the state again, backing a new religious settlement and founding a new capital at Constantinople, positioned for trade, defense, and longevity. The empire is now two realities, the western half strained by manpower and revenue, and the eastern half, richer, more urban, and better placed to absorb shocks. In 476, the Western Roman Empire ends in formal terms, but Rome's idea does not die, because institutions can outlive flags when people still need order. The Eastern Roman Empire, later called Byzantine, continues with Roman law, Roman administration, and a different strategic posture. Fewer dreams of endless expansion, more attention to survival. Justinian briefly pushes west in the 6th century, but reconquest is expensive, and the lesson repeats. Ambition can win battles and still lose the balance sheet. In the 7th century, new forces rise, and the empire fights wars that become wars of endurance, learning again that borders are negotiated not only with steel, but with tax capacity. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade sacks Constantinople, and the capital learns a brutal fact about allies. Incentives matter more than declared purpose when debt and opportunity align. The Byzantines reclaim the city, but the empire never fully recovers its economic base, and survival becomes a long retreat managed by diplomacy, fortification, and careful compromise. In 1453, Constantinople falls to the Ottoman Turks, ending the Eastern Roman line, and the final scene is not sudden collapse, but a long narrowing of options. When you look back, the 5 good emperors are not magic men. They are a rare stretch where selection, incentives, and self-control align long enough for compounding to occur. The adoption strategy is succession planning as downside protection, the opposite of leaving your most important role to genetics and optimism. Their infrastructure and legal consistency are institutional compounding, small repairs repeated until an empire feels predictable, and predictable systems attract trade, talent, and compliance. Marcus's Meditations survives because it is not a victory speech. It is a manual for staying steady when outcomes are uncertain and pain is guaranteed. For money, the lesson is to treat stability as an asset, build reserves, avoid fragility, and design handoffs so your life does not depend on one perfect mood or one lucky year. For work and leadership, the lesson is process over mood. Make decisions in daylight, reward competence, keep standards consistent, and remember that people follow calm clarity faster than they follow intensity. For modern organizations, the parallel is blunt. A business can have record quarters and still be one bad succession away from losing trust, talent, and valuation. Rome's best 84 years were not free. They were purchased with discipline, inspection, and the humility to choose stability over ego, until one heir reminded the world that selection is a strategy, not a tradition.